Welcome back. We're going to launch into or dive into this second segment of Chapter 2 in the micro textbook. And we're going to get into it and at least give you a precursor on your view into what we've learned in the past, talking about scarcity, talking about opportunity cost. And we're going to jump into the factors of production. And they use a quote in the text that at least attributed to Albert Einstein, says, can't make matter out of nothing. And so that's the way that the authors are kind of launching into the factors of production. And the way they define factors of production, it's the resources available to the economy for the production of goods and services. Again, production of goods and services, production probability model. How they combine inputs into a production process and you generate outputs. And the inputs in that production process, we're going to go through them. We're going to launch into them in just a second. Also, the book defines utility, and we've talked about utility in the past. It's kind of a weird concept, but it's a concept that economists have developed to assign value to the satisfaction or benefit of consuming a good or service. And the book actually defines it as the value or satisfaction that people derive from the goods and services they consume and the activities they pursue. So it's not just goods and services, it's anything you're doing in your normal day-to-day life. If you got up this morning and decided you wanted to go to Starbucks for breakfast, there was a utility or value to you to go into Starbucks for breakfast, as opposed to stopping at McDonald's and getting your coffee or something, or going to Dunkin' Donuts and getting coffee and something to eat. You have a higher value of utility assigned by swinging into Starbucks and grabbing your breakfast. Because in Nashville there are probably numerous places to stop and get breakfast. You've got Waffle House, you've got multiple restaurants kind of there on Broadway and on Church Street. There's that, is it Ellington Boulevard soda shop, or Ellington Place soda shop? Anyway, there's a soda shop there. There's some, you can stop in at Krispy Kreme, get you a donut and some coffee. So you've got a lot of opportunities in Nashville, but you assign subconsciously, you're assigning a value to stopping in at Starbucks for whatever reason. And when we're getting into personal utility, it's personal choice, and everybody assigns the utility, the value of a utility to the decisions they make on a daily basis. But we're going to jump in now to the factors of production. And typically when you're thinking about the factors of production, you're talking about labor, you're talking about capital, you're talking about natural resources. And don't forget that when you look at natural resources, you're talking about natural gas, you're talking about gasoline goes in your car, you're talking about but the most important one for most people is land. That's a natural resource that falls in that category. And then you've got technology, and don't get confused as we go through the text. Economists, when they talk about technology, they're not talking about your mobile device, your cell phone, your portable computer, your iPad, any of these portable devices, not thinking about so much chips as they're thinking about the technology in the production process. What process, what policies and procedures goes into the technology that drives that production process? It takes inputs and turns it into outputs. And also under technology, you've got entrepreneurship. And that's one that kind of throws students off sometimes because they don't think in terms of entrepreneurship, but we're going to get into that when we get into a little deeper into the factors of production. But we're going to start off with labor. And the book defines labor. It's a human effort that can be applied to the production of goods and services. Okay, that sounds reasonable. And then they throw out the term labor force, and they're lumping all of the labor that you have in the United States into the labor force. Once you get into, if you've had a macro class, or if you end up taking a macro class in the future, when they're talking about calculating, especially in a macro sense, talking about the unemployment rate, their labor force is they define labor force as somewhat specific. It's those individuals working, or those individuals that would like to work, that have actually, I think it's been trying to find, they're unemployed, but they are been trying or looking for a job, at least once in the last 4 weeks or something. So a little different definition of labor force, but still it's a combination of resources that we can lump into labor. And the authors also get into, and they talk about the types of labor. And you've got what they call natural ability. It's natural ability an untrained, uneducated worker brings to a production process. There's a lot of untrained natural ability that you see in the workforce, especially around Atlanta here. There is a tremendous amount of natural ability that individuals are employing, especially in, just some examples, do yard work, to do, construction, pool services, landscaping, just a lot of natural ability. And at some point, that natural ability is trained, or if they've done a job long enough, they're going to acquire some type of training, some type of expertise. And they're talking about the human capital. That's building human capital. And one of the things that I've always found helpful, and maybe it's just because of the companies I've worked for, or maybe the regions that I've worked in, is I spend a lot of time training, educating, mentoring, motivating teams. I spend a tremendous amount of time building human capital of the teams that I have led in the past. And many of the reasons are, it's worked for companies that the wage scale, at least for individuals, coming into the company, the wage scale is reasonably low. It's not necessarily competitive. I worked for HealthNet, and I worked for Aetna, was located in San Diego, and I had to grab a lot of the individuals that on my team right out of school, because the wage rates that we had within the company employment structure was not conducive with competing with the pharmaceutical companies that were located along Torrey Pines Drive. So, they were generating huge levels of profit, working on new drugs, working on new pharmaceuticals. And because of that, they could pay individuals twice what I could pay them either at HealthNet or with Aetna as a health plan. So, so not only did I not have the resources, but the talent pool, I don't want to say was somewhat shallow, but the talent pool, there weren't as many individuals that were interested in moving into kind of support roles in healthcare as there were. They'd rather be doctors, lawyers, a lot of military type individuals there that not only did they rotate in and out every 2 to 3 years, but their spouses went with them. So it was a little difficult in San Diego to develop a workforce and keep that workforce. So you were constantly training, educating, building that human capital. Then I flipped kind of the flip side of that. I flipped to Buffalo, working for Blue Cross Blue Shield. And while they were somewhat competitive salary-wise, the talent pool in Buffalo was just shallow. It was shallow, looking for the type of individuals that I needed to build a team. So I was, again, training, educating, motivating, mentoring, building that human capital of a team, because not so much because I didn't have the wage scale to pay them and compete with other healthcare providers or other health plans in that Buffalo market. It was an issue with everybody and that were in the healthcare space in Buffalo. It was just a shallow talent pool. And most people, when if they were living in another area of the United States and you started to interview them and they found out you're in Buffalo, it was kind of like throwing a cold blanket on the interview process or a cold bucket of water, because they didn't want to move to Buffalo. Buffalo got a bad rap. Yeah, they got a lot of snow, but the winters were not as cold as some other places in the United States, and they were set up that they could handle the snow. So it was kind of a misnomer. So if you couldn't find people in Buffalo to staff your positions, then you had to build the human capital of what you had, or you had to find individuals that were coming from other cold climates and didn't mind moving to Buffalo. And they talk about in the text, they talk about labor power. And, talking about labor power, it's how many workers are there and what is the level of human capital within that workforce. And, if you want to boost human capital, you're talking about incentivizing employees to maybe get advanced degrees if they didn't have a college degree, to pay for the education if they'll take classes, talking about extra credentialing, talking about sending them to seminars to help boost that human capital. And the book talks about if there are not enough workers, so if the gross number of workers isn't there, how do you change that? And they talk about, relaxing immigration policies, talking about raising the retirement age, maybe, minimizing the child labor laws. But they're talking about in the text about not only working and building human capital, but how do you increase just the gross number of workers? And a lot of those are going to be, at least initially, unskilled workers. Even an individual coming out of college, they are somewhat unskilled. They may have an educational background, but when they go into that first job, it takes some training and education just to get them up to speed on what the policies and procedures and how the company functions within a particular marketplace. And then we're going to talk about the second factor of production. We're going to talk about capital. And the first thing students think about is they think about stocks, bonds, liquidity, and that's financial capital. And while it can be used to acquire capital stock, economists think of capital in terms of, again, capital stock. And capital stocks are machinery, buildings, trucks, anything that is used. It's used to try to help in the production process as we go from inputs to outputs. And the two things that have to be satisfied to be capital stock, the resource must have been produced, and secondarily, the resource can be used to produce other goods and services. So, and I'm not drawing a blank on what the terminology is that they call it, but you go into Starbucks and you want one of their woo-woo coffees, and they've got this little machine sitting over here, and they get the coffee, and they generate the coffee, and then it does some stuff with the milk and creates some foam, and next thing you know, you've got this really expensive high calorie cup of coffee. But that machine that they use to generate that high calorie, high cost cup of coffee is considered capital stock. That machine was produced in a factory somewhere, and it is used to produce your cup of coffee, which is one of the goods and services that they produce at Starbucks. Think about going into McDonald's. You go into McDonald's this morning and you get one of their meals and it has hash browns. It's being produced in a deep fryer. That deep fryer is capital stock. It's been produced by a company, and it's being used to generate the hash browns that you're going to enjoy for your breakfast. So think about anything that is used to in the production process. It's been produced in another production process, but you're going to purchase that, you're going to rent it, you're going to lease it, you're going to put it in your company, and you're going to use that to generate another good or service. So that's what they're talking about capital stock. And then they briefly talk about, financial capital. They talk about, forms of funding, including money and other paper assets that represent claims on future payments. And if you're an owner of a company, or if you're the CFO of a company, you may use some of those claims on future assets to buy capital stock. So just understand that when it's an economist talking about capital, they're talking about capital stock as opposed to financial capital. And then the next one that we're going to talk about are natural resources. And again, land is one of the natural resources that most people, automatically comes to mind. But natural resources, other than you have to know how to use it, the two drivers or the two parameters that differentiate something as a natural resource, it originally has to be found in nature. Trees, the thing turned into lumber, and it can be used for production of goods and services. So think about a forest. Forest has got trees in it. They cut down the trees, take them to a sawmill. Sawmill turns them into lumber. Next thing you know, a contractor comes. They're either building a building or they're building homes. They're taking that, and it is a process. Trees to lumber to construction to the finished product of homes or buildings or whatever. So natural resource, all it's found in the ground. Natural resource found in nature, and you can take it, you can refine it, and you can turn it into gasoline. And gasoline can be used in, delivery vehicles and the capital stock that, is helping produce and transport goods and services. And there's always a concern when we're talking about natural resources is, when will the natural resources run out? And what are you going to do if they start to run out? And the text they talk about, there are ways of expanding natural resources. You can discover new resources. They discovered uranium. They talk about the gold rush in 1850s in California. New ways, it's a new resource turned into gold was used in manufacturing processes. New uses for resources. So, what are the new uses for the resources that we have? And then finally, they talk about new ways to extract the resources. And when you're talking about oil and natural gas, you've got fracking, you've got horizontal drilling. There are new ways to extract those resources. So if we think we're running out of resources, there are ways to expand, either the future supply of resources or willing to expand the use of resources we have now that will enable us to save some of those resources for future use. And then, they kind of jump into the last one, and they lump technology and entrepreneurship together. So technology is, as they define it in the text, is a knowledge that can be applied to the production of goods and services. It's the ability to transform inputs into outputs. So technology is focused on the production process. How does GM, what technology do they use in their production process to turn the raw materials or the inputs into the finished products or the automobiles and the trucks and anything that GM is making? Same with Ford, the same with Musk and his Tesla automobiles. It is technology is the approach to efficiently utilizing resources, so the inputs in a production process to generate outputs. And again, the ability to transform these and the stock of technology is, in the text they talk about, it's only limited by our understanding or our education of how to use it. So again, similar to talking about the ways to expand natural resources, there are ways to expand technology by increasing our understanding, increasing our human capital, which entails increasing the understanding of how to use that technology. And they talk about also the combination of technology and entrepreneurship. It's a key role in putting the factors of production to work in the production process. Again, think about it, inputs to outputs. What is that middle ground in there? And that's technology, entrepreneurship in that production process. And again, whatever you do, when they talk about technology, don't think about necessarily iPhones and iPads and computers. It's technology that drives that production process. And lastly, when we're talking about factors of production, they jump into entrepreneurship, and they talk about an entrepreneur as a person who, operating within the context of a market economy, seeks to earn profits by finding new ways to organize the factors of production. And that sounds fairly straightforward. And in a free market economy like we have here in the U.S., entrepreneurs are very well accommodated for what they bring to the production process. And the way they are accommodated is through profits. They are looking at increased profits. So the free market really incentivizes individuals to become entrepreneurs, to increase the production or increase the efficiency of the production process, and that they'll be justly rewarded. The thing that some people don't realize is, they're also important in shepherding new products and services to the marketplace. And depending on what kind of an entrepreneur you are, if you're an entrepreneur at GM, you may be rewarded by increased salary, increased stock options, increased benefit package at GM. If you're an entrepreneur working on your own and trying to bring new products to the market, you are risking your savings and your reputation for higher profits. Most market economies are built on the entrepreneurial spirit. And again, we're talking about market economies in the U.S., in New Zealand, and in UK, and to maybe a lesser extent in places like Sweden, Germany, France, because there are some government regulation laws that constrain. But still, we're talking about individuals that are trying to develop ways to increase the efficiency of technology, increase the efficiency of the production process in return for significantly increased profits and financial rewards. Think about Elon Musk. He is, the idea of, probably the idea of most people think of when you're talking about entrepreneurs. Thousands of entrepreneurs in the United States, hundreds of thousands across the world. But you talk about entrepreneurs, and a lot of times, students will raise their hand and you say, who do you think of when they say entrepreneurs? The first person they raise their hand is, Elon Musk. What about Edison? What about Einstein? What about all of the entrepreneurs in the past that have moved the production process forward? They were all entrepreneurs. Maybe they weren't thought of as entrepreneurs at that point in time. But today, I think most people are going to raise hands and say, yep, Elon Musk, he's the number one entrepreneur setting out there, just generating profits and, coming up with new ideas on a daily basis. So that's going to kind of wind us up with chapter 2. And again, we're going to get into how these factors of production are used in the next segment or two. But don't always remember, we're talking about land, which falls under natural resources. We're talking about labor, either unskilled labor or labor that has been improved through the kind of the human capital process. We're talking about capital stock. We're talking about technology. And we're talking about entrepreneurship. So technology and entrepreneurship, they're kind of working together, and they are taking the other natural resources, capital, stock, and labor, and helping move those efficiently into the production process to take and turn inputs into outputs that you and I enjoy on a daily basis. Everybody else in the United States, everybody else in the world, they enjoy the fruits and labor of taking inputs and turn them into outputs. And as I said, that's going to kind of wind us up for this segment of chapter 2. And I'll be back soon, and we'll jump into segment 3. And we're going to talk about the production possibilities curve. Talk to you soon.